Okay. I see there was an issue with my sound, so I think I can. I hope now it's okay. I think I can start. Okay, so I'll start with a brief introduction about myself. My name is Alan, and I'm the Foreverland senior ambassador. And in this session, I'll be taking you through an introduction to IPFS Gateway. So the first thing that we will look out is the challenges with the client server model. So if you're new maybe to these terms, you may ask yourself, what is the client server model? So the client server model is the traditional way in which content is relayed throughout the internet. So these client server models entails like two major things or protocols. The first thing is the DNS, that is a domain name system that is used by our browser to find the IP address of the server. Then there's the HTTP, that is hypertext transfer protocol, that is used to request websites from that server. So such interactions are characterized by that client server model. So your browser is a client interacting with HTTP and DNS server. So this model has some flaws in that it is fundamentally centralized. There is like a single point where the information is stored and retrieved. So this server is what now relays the information to the client. And as from this image, you can see there's only one server. Then it relies on gatekeepers, and such gatekeepers may cause issues like censorship of content, in that you may find instances whereby like there is a dictatorship. For example, in countries where there is a dictator regime, the content maybe they may censor journalists to relay certain information, and that is sort of denying people the freedom of speech. Okay, so these are the challenges that we get with the client server model. So when we come to content addressing with IPFS, IPFS revolutionizes the way content is stored and addressed in the web. So IPFS introduces that decentralized way or decentralized approach to relay information on the internet. So if it's the first time you're hearing about IPFS, IPFS is basically a peer-to-peer protocol for storing and accessing files and websites. So it is fundamentally different from the HTTP protocol that it's what it's commonly known, or the HTTP is like the foundation of for the internet. So IPFS, due to how it's built, there is no single point of failure because there are many nodes which now store like information in the network. So that peer-to-peer network also prevents issues like censorship of content, and IPFS introduces content addressing, which is a different model to location-based addressing. So that is like a general overview of IPFS. So if you have files in IPFS, there are two common ways you can use to fetch these files. So that is one, running an IPFS node, and two, using an IPFS gateway. So I'll just share my screen so that we can come to the Foreverland gateway website so that you can see how the gateway works. Let me share my screen. So Foreverland has its own IPFS gateway. So the IPFS gateway works to translate between Web2 and Web3 by providing a bridge between HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and IPFS. As you can remember, earlier on, I mentioned on how like HTTP works, which is to use to request website or information from the server. So Gateway offers that bridge between Web2 and Web3 to provide that access to information. So when we come to the Foreverlands gateway, so we can see there's a public gateway and there's a dedicated gateway. So a public gateway is used to access. It's open to. Can share my screen so that you can see. So this public gateway, it's just loading slowly. So the public gateway works by simply you pass the content identifier for the information stored on the IPFS network. So so once you pass the content identifier to that gateway, it relays the information through your browser. If you try to if you've interacted with IPFS and you've tried to access maybe the content identifier directly through your browser, you may get an error because browsers do not support the canonical IPFS URLs. So, for example, if you try IPFS colon slash and then you put in the if you then you put in the content identifier, your browser will bring you an error because it does not recognize the that type of the URL preferred by IPFS. There are some browsers that support this type of URL, like Brave browser, but for Chrome it does not support. That's why we use gateways to access any content that's to access the content that is stored on IPFS. So I'll now share the screen of, you can see a visual presentation of Foreverland's IPFS gateway. As you can see, this is Foreverland's IPFS gateway, and it can be accessed by going to IPFS .foreverland.io. And here I have like an IPFS hash, the content identifier. So I've pasted it. As you can see, when I click enter, it will direct me to another tab whereby the you can see like a visual presentation of now that content. So this tab, it's the IPFS documentation. So I entered the documentation. The documentation page is stored on the IPFS documentation page is stored on IPFS. So this the hash that I pasted previously on Foreverland's gateway dashboard. When I clicked on it, it took me to forever to IPFS documentation. And from this URL, you're able to see the documentation, the CID content identifier of the documentation, and then the IPFS gateway URL, the Foreverland IPFS gateway URL. So I can share my whole screen so that it's easier to get like a better overview of how that URL looks like. So here you can see there is the IPFS content identifier. This content identifier is where the IPFS documentation is stored. So when I click enter, I'll be directed to the IPFS documentation page. And for this page, you can see there is that content identifier over here. Then there's the IPFS Foreverland gateway. So if and the good thing about this is whether you're using whether you're storing like your websites or your content or on Foreverland or not, you can access any type of any type of content despite it not being stored either within Foreverland. As long as it is on the IPFS system, you can use Foreverland's gateway to access the files or websites or any information stored on IPFS. So this marks the end of my presentation. And here I have explained how the IPFS gateway works. So yeah, I guess that marks the end of my presentation. Thank you all for joining and for your curiosity to learn about IPFS and IPFS gateway. Thank you.